that was our official timer to get started here.
All right.
By accident, but yeah, it worked out. So it's 12:01. I'm sure I know we have several attendees with us currently. Welcome to this what promises to be a wonderful discussion with three really amazing guests that have taken time out of their days and their practices to be with us. So without further ado, we're going to kind of get started here with some introductions. So we have Elizabeth Alford from Pollen Architecture. Elizabeth graduated from Wellesley College and holds a master's degree in architecture from Columbia University, where she was awarded the AIA Citation of Merit for outstanding graduate work. Before returning to her native Austin, Elizabeth apprenticed with leading design firms in New York and abroad, including Smith Miller Hawkinson Architects, ARO, Polsheck and Partners, and OMA. Elizabeth founded Pollen Architecture in Austin, Texas in 2008 with Michael Young and Dason Whitsitt. Elizabeth's work centers on creating engaging spaces that are carefully integrated into their surroundings, both natural settings and urban contexts. Elizabeth uses section, natural light, and materiality to enrich the experience of space. And for kind of tying into one of the main reasons we've invited her to be here today, Elizabeth has taught architecture design studios at the University of Texas at Austin since 2003, as well as seminars on factory production of houses and building components. She organized the conference Site Off-Site Architecture in the Factory Built House in 2004 and received a Graham Foundation grant to produce a book of the same name. She was a faculty advisor for 2 UT Solar Decathlon teams. Welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have Murray Legg, FAIA. Murray is a graduate of the Cooper Union School of Architecture in New York City. His professional achievements include receiving the 2006 AIA Austin Young Architectural Professional Award, as well as more than 20 design awards, including 2 national AIA awards and the Chicago Atheneum American Architecture Award. Winner of the prestigious Lyceum Fellowship, he was also twice a finalist in Van Allen Institute competitions, including the Paris Prize. Murray has led various studios at the UT School of Architecture, including graduate studies in advanced design, vertical studio, and integrative studio, as well as undergrad studios in Design 5 and Sound Building Studio. Murray is also a guest lecturer at UT and taught briefly in the design department of the art school as well. Thank you, Murray, for joining us. And finally, Juan Moreau, FAIA, lead AP. Juan Moreau was born in Barcelona and obtained his professional degree at the Escuela de Arquitectura of the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. In 1989, he earned a Fulbright scholarship to complete a post-professional master's degree at Yale University. Juan is a partner at Moreau Rivera Architects in Austin and the David Bruton Jr. Centennial Professor in Urban Studies at the UT School of Architecture, where he has taught design, construction, and Mexican architecture since 1997. In his teaching, practice, and research, Juan explores the role of the architectural profession in civic life, the relationship between the man-made and nature, and the relevance of history for designers. His new book, Moreau Rivera Architects, Building a New Arcadia, is being released this fall by the University of Texas Press and is also available on Amazon for pre-order right now. So congratulations, Juan. That's a terrific achievement to have a monograph of your work. I'm sure that both Murray and Elizabeth with Pollen will someday have their own, probably in the near future, monographs of their beautiful work as well. So to keep track of them, you can check out their websites, pollenarchitecture.com, murraylegg.com, and miroRivera.com, respectively. And you can, just take a look at the great work that they are doing. So without further ado, we're going to kind of jump into our questions here. So I'm going to start with you, Elizabeth, if that's okay. What circumstances or opportunities led you to seek a position in the higher education of architecture?
Okay. When I moved back to Austin in 2003, it was a big change and break in my practice. I had started my own office in New York, concurrent with having children. And so moving to Austin, it seemed like a good way to try something new, to be attached to the architecture community here. And when I was in grad school, I was a design assistant, like an assistant studio teacher, and I liked doing that a lot. And I also co-taught with my boss, Lori Hawkinson. I kind of knew I liked doing that. So I applied for a job at UT.
Very, very good. Very good. Murray, how did you, what led you to seek a teaching position?
Yeah, good question. I guess when I was younger, I probably had like a completely unrealistic idea of what, I actually thought it would be fun to create my own architecture school. So I always had these sort of fantasies when I was like, when I mean younger, I mean like in my 20s. I moved to Austin when I was 29. Just sort of like having really enjoyed school and been really inspired by it. Like school's such a special time that, so I had this sort of like ideas of being an architect and creating a school. I also thought I was going to be a filmmaker too, like and do kind of all of these things. I guess I realized that actually once I started to, be fortunate enough to have, to be able to get commissions and to do projects, how like incredibly immersive and time consuming just that alone was. I realized I had no time to do anything else at all. I would say that, I moved to Austin in the 90s. And one of the reasons why I'm here is really because of the school. I had come to visit a friend who was actually teaching in the film department. My wife teaches at RTF. But just the culture of the culture of like a small kind of creative city with a large university is a really nice combination, because you have most of our friends at that time were people that were teaching at the university, in the art school and the film department. So I had these kind of connections. But I'll say I never, although I'd always wanted to teach and thought that would be something that I would be interested in doing, I'd never really actually like applied for a job or pursued it. So I've actually only done it when I've been asked to do it. And it started with the architecture school. I think actually Nicole Wiedemann was the first person to invite me in for reviews. So I started with kind of doing reviews, and then I was kind of think back maybe 15 years ago is when Kevin, who was the director at the time, just reached out and asked if I'd like to teach an advanced design studio. So that's kind of how I got started doing it, was through that. I'd imagine if I hadn't been asked to do it, I probably would have reached out and maybe like tried to apply for a position and that sort of thing. But I kind of wait until I'm asked to teach to do it.
Okay, that's great. Starting your own school of architecture doesn't sound ambitious at all. Actually,
well, it was like a kind of design build. It was called The Yard, and it was basically the ideas is a kind of a junkyard architecture school is basically the concept. So
okay, you should continue to pursue that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Juan, how about you? How did you first kind of think about?
I was going to say the same thing. Hey, Murray, don't give up on that. We can.
You like it? Yeah. Will you come to be a visiting teacher at the junkyard?
I'm saying that you have now, a lot of, maybe less energy than when you were 29, but
right.
You have the network now to make it happen. So
right, there we go.
The School of Architecture, I can imagine. So
right.
it's interesting that there's always like an interesting story about how people came to teaching. In my case, I have to say that I was not, it was not in my radar when I was going to school, when even during the time that I was at Yale. You know, you interact with students, you do things related to teaching, because studio setting is very much about learning from each other. So you play a little bit that role on the receiving and the giving end, but I had not really thought about it. So after I finished at Yale, I went to work in New York, and I was working there without really thinking about the teaching idea. So busy, so many things going on. So you know, it didn't really cross my mind at the time. When I came to Austin for work, I was working and I was going back and forth from New York. We were working on the Dell house, and it was that I forgot exactly how we got in contact with, and I think it was actually the Dells that had been in contact with Larry Speck, and Larry Speck invited me to teach one semester while I was here, finishing the job and starting to think about staying in Austin. So Ross and I had just bought an apartment in New York. So we were very excited about New York, and we were excited about staying there. But all of a sudden, coming here for this professional kind of time frame of saying you need to, you know, be there until you finish the job. So that's the mentality that I came to Austin for. And so many people have the same story. Came to Austin, fall in love with Austin. I like Austin. Let's stay here. You know, so that's how we decided. And the teaching came into the picture at that time, because they invited me to teach one semester vertical studio, just like you, Murray, and I loved it. So it was a great studio. I had never taught, and it came very natural. It was very successful. I love the students. I still keep in touch with a lot of the students that are. Chris Krager was actually one of my students in that studio, in the first studio that I taught. I keep in touch with several of the people there in that studio. It was fantastic. So it was a great experience, and I realized that there was probably something in me that was, in a way, looking for the opportunity to teach. Maybe I had not thought about it, but it became very natural. So, and I think just like Elizabeth, I was starting to think about the idea of, well, we had already made the decision, Ross and I, that we were going to stay, opening a practice. So the idea of combining with teaching, this is a very common thing, talking about small firms. I mean, trying to combine teaching with practice gives a little bit of that cushion that you feel like you can have a little more ability to combine both. So that was also one factor in my case. But I enjoy it. The main thing is that I really enjoy it, and I really liked the kind of energy and the interaction with the students from that day. And so there was a tenure track position open at that time, and without really knowing very much about the process or how these things work, because I was completely removed from the academic system in the US, so I didn't understand what tenure was and all that. But I applied, and they gave me the position. So it's just not looking back. So I started teaching that one semester. I was the lecturer, and then the next semester I started as a tenure track. So and I've been doing it ever since, until I took that year off to do the book.
Well, fantastic. You mentioned something there that I think we should touch on, just kind of the synergy between a small firm and a practice and you know, education as well, or academia. And so, Murray, I'm going to start with you on this question, but what impacts has your teaching had on your architectural practice? I can kind of feed you some, you know, some prompts, but of course, we'll defer to you to answer in the way that you want to. You know, so some things that come to my mind are opportunities to explore design ideas with students that might find its way into your built work. Mm-hmm. Surround yourself with younger, potentially wide open minds that have subsequently influenced your own thinking and approach to architecture. Do you have increased opportunities for exposure to the architectural and public communities in which you teach? And then finally, maybe access to additional resources through your position, whether they be grants, publications, relationships with fellow practitioners and professionals.
Right. Yeah, no, good question. I think, yeah, like Juan, I just really enjoyed it, the first studio I taught. I mean, I don't know if fun is the right, I wouldn't call it really, I found it very challenging. Studio is, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're there for from 1 to 6. And I think like, it's actually quite humbling because you realize like how few ideas you really have as an architect, especially in the beginning. And teaching is quite there's Juan, who's a genius, I think, is at a teacher, but there's a real kind of art to it. But I think for me personally, there are a number of things that first of all, I really like the environment. Like it's a really nice, I like that. And I believe in the, I don't know how to, that a university it requires a certain detachment from the quote real world in a way that it is kind of like a library, is a kind of a place for experimentation that doesn't have to, and this is maybe somewhat controversial idea. I mean, some architecture schools need to align more with the profession, some not, but I like that running an office, working 16 hours a day on building projects. There's something very refreshing I find about kind of moving into the studio environment. It's like a different kind of place. And so there's that. And then there's also just like, and I find this actually more now as I've gotten older. When I was younger, I was like closer to the age of the students, particularly in like grad studios. Closer in age to them, but now as I get older, and I actually have a daughter who's the age of she's in school right now, in university. So it's kind of nice just to kind of hang out. That sounds like an old timer. I like hanging out with the youngsters, like kind of that. So that is really, and I guess as I've gotten moved, like now I find I actually get a lot more out of teaching than I did before. Like I do find it. I guess energizing would be the right word, or the kind of like experimentation. So that's in general. On a practical level, like I look back, like almost all of the employees, not everybody, but most of them were people I met through the school. So there's that. And I built relationships with them over time, like a year or two. They were students. I'd stay in touch. They'd come and intern in the office. We'd hire students that were in the studio, and then a year later they'd graduate, and then maybe we'd hire them. So that's like a very important kind of reciprocal kind of relationship too. I do think it is interesting as an instructor to it's not that you I don't know if I've ever run a studio where I've like taken an office project and like done that, but it is interesting to see how when you pose a problem, to kind of observe students running through variations on that. Like there is something I think very powerful effect it has on your creativity as an architect in the office to kind of be around that kind of like persistent experimentation, and particularly around technology. Like I remember the first time the school got a laser cutter. And just seeing how people use the laser cutter like that, seeing how the technology kind of affects it has. So that's one of the kind of outcomes too. But so it's a very, I would say, like kind of organic relationship that I often feel like I actually get more than I put into the school. So when I teach, I don't teach that often. It's usually like one semester a year, that sort of thing.
Okay. That's a great ending statement there about kind of the reciprocal effect that you get. That's fantastic. Juan, same question to you. What impacts do you feel like teaching has had on your practice?
Well, I mean, I think that in general, the idea of teaching or being in the academic world is that you are joining an intellectual enterprise, right? The university as an institution is there to promote and to produce knowledge, to disseminate it, to discover, to do research. So once you join that, you automatically become part of something that is positive, no matter how you look at it, from the stimulation, intellectual stimulation, the younger minds, the exchange of ideas with colleagues, with students. So you just put yourself in a place where good things can happen. So that's the general big picture from the point of view of like the what is attractive about being in that place, that you're part of that conversation. So you need to articulate what you are interested in, or what you do, or how you do it. So in a way, being in front of students, forces you to have a little more clarity about what's in your head that may not be needed to be articulated if you are not necessarily in that situation. You just do, but sometimes with the students, it makes you reflect more on how you do things, and not necessarily to impose what you do on how you do it, but it's just you in a way have to process and share, and that's part of the learning. The learning is very much about sharing experiences and trying to learn from that exchange. And the students bring a lot of positive in terms of the energy, the dialogue. Like Morris says at the beginning, you are more like one of them, a little ahead, and then all of a sudden now it's like teaching, people that are in the same generation as my kids. Also, I have kids in college too. So it evolves, but it doesn't lose that magic of like that exchange and that interaction, and the ability to force you to keep reflecting what you do and how you do it. And then there's like I think one of the problems that you have, yes, then there are people that come to work with you. So as I was saying, the Chris Krager was the first employee that I had at Miro Rivera at Miro before even Miguel came. So Chris Krager was in a little room in my house working across the table with me when we had an office in the house in a little room. And then Stacy, I'm very happy to see that she's here, Stacy Vanna Roder, that she was in my first studio also, and she put that comment in the chat. She also came to work with me for many years, and she was part of that first studio. So all of a sudden that conversation happens at another level. Then they start their own practices. Stacy has her own practice, and Chris has his own practice. So that conversation keeps going, and so the learning keeps going after, in both directions. So I see teaching as beneficial, a very beneficial and positive contribution to the overall kind of intellectual part of the practice. Not anything very particular, but more that sense that you are enriching the conversation by engaging.
I love the concept of gaining your own sense of clarity by communicating with other people and learning to better talk about your own, as you said, sort of what's in your own mind as you are potentially explaining things to your students. And I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I was going to talk about too, is how it makes you be very self-reflective and helps you communicate more clearly when you have to explain your process or to a group of students. And I think it's great for personal or professional development in terms of it's a very compressed process. And when you're in the working environment of your office and projects tend to take much longer, the thing that's great about school is it's fast. And so you really have to think carefully about a schedule and how your students are walking through the steps of the projects. And I think all of that is really good for you as a professional in general to go through that process. And I think one thing that's really nice about teaching is for a practitioner that there is a lot of optimism. There's a lot of, I want to save the world kind of fervor, or how can we do it better? And that is really energizing. And when you're in the working world and you're dealing with, specifications and budgets and budget cuts and, contractors not building things properly, there's a lot of sort of tough parts about the profession, and stepping into a school environment is a real breath of fresh air and very energizing in that regard. And I think the other thing that's just really fun is seeing the students grow and how much progress and how much progress they can make in such a short time. And it's really very, I keep using the word energizing, but to see, 15 projects develop over the course, or, like if you have 15 students and you're doing 3 projects, you see 45 projects in the space of 3 months or 4 months. And it's fun, it's really fun. That's the fun part. And it's very gratifying to see the growth that the students make, and they're, it's often a really nice relationship, and that's all very satisfying. So, and yeah, it is fun to see, there's so many UT architects that stay around town, and it's really fun to see where they go and what happens. However, I will say it definitely takes time away from practice. And that's one reason I've sort of stepped back in teaching in the last couple of years, is just because when you're running a small practice, it's a careful balancing act. And I think for a long time, it was hard, but doable, but just barely doable. And then we got busier, and it just, I felt like something needed to give in my schedule. And so it is, the time and energy drain is real, and something to really consider carefully. I would say that. And we definitely, I say we because Michael teaches with me sometimes too. We have taught subjects that are of interest to us. I think early on when I was teaching group studios a couple of times, and I found that super helpful. Like, one thing I really appreciate about UT is how the other teachers teach you to teach, or help pull you along. And teaching a studio where there's 4 sections all doing the same project, that is a super helpful way to learn to teach. And I think it definitely takes time to learn to teach well. And I don't know if they still do the faculty reviews at the end, where everybody pins up their students' work and then you go around and look. That was always, would take a while, but it would be like this, 4-hour meeting. But it was super helpful to get ideas and to see what other assignments other people were giving. And also just the faculty in general. And I want to give a special shout out to Nicole Wiedemann, who is really quite selfless and generous with her time. I think she in particular, I'm sure there are a lot of others, Juan, I don't know, but, have really helped bring along newer studio teachers. So.
All great, Elizabeth. That all of that resonated. I love the point about the compression, the time compression in the studio. And I think, I can imagine that a lot of students can leave with that sort of in their mind and in their past experience, moving into, the specifications and the budget cuts and all the things that you have to deal with in the real world, but really be able to carry forward that kind of thesis, the design-oriented thesis, that they can continue to come back even in times when you're sort of slogging through those things, but always keep those tenets in mind. So that's interesting. All right, so I'm going to throw out just a straight request for facts. I'll throw it out to you, Juan, but I'm just trying to understand the differences between assistant professor, associate professor, adjunct professor, teaching fellow, and full professor. I don't really have a good grasp myself on what the differences are between those positions, and I know some of them can be obviously a little bit less involved. And as a full professor, I imagine your time constraints and the amount of time that you need to spend engaged with the university is significantly more than, say, that of an assistant professor. But can you just kind of briefly explain sort of what the different tiers of teaching are?
Yes, I would. I would be very happy because it took me, I mean, I wish I had known this also early on when I applied, because I learned it as I went. But it is the biggest difference, I would say, is the two blocks that you need to think about is the tenure track, tenure positions, and the adjunct positions. So assistant, associate, and full professor, there's not as much difference in terms of the time commitment. So assistant professor is a very intense time commitment also, because you are not yet tenured. So you can argue, some people may argue that it's even the other way around, that that you have definitely more pressure and more tension in the teaching as an assistant professor, because basically the tenure positions involve a tenure track period, which is when you're an assistant. An assistant professor is someone on a tenure track position in a university. So tenure track means that you are being, put in a position for, in 6 years, you need to demonstrate that you are worthy of becoming tenure in that institution. So those 6 years can be very intense. It's really 5, because the last year is when everything has to be decided. So the university, this is a very typical of the American university system. The tenure allows, the concept is that tenure systems were developed to give freedom to teachers to have the sense that they can be in an institution with a certain, sense of protection of their position. So if you are a tenured professor, you can voice your opinions, and theoretically, you cannot be punished for those opinions, as the institution needs to respect the tenure positions, unless obviously you are doing something that is wrong. But what I'm saying is that in terms of the intellectual enterprise of the university is supposedly protected by the tenure system that allows for professors to have the freedom to say what they think they need to say, independently of what the institution or the government, even in public institutions that depend of the legislature. So the tenure phase of trial is the assistant professor. So when you're an assistant professor, you need to do work, you need to teach, but you need to produce something that demonstrates that you are going to gain that tenure. And the tenure is based on your research output and the impact of your work. So the impact of your work is what determines if you get tenure. So that's why I'm saying that it's stressful, because you have a certain time frame to do that. And when you do, then you become tenure, and then you become associate professor. So associate professor with tenure basically means you have tenure, but now you need to produce more work, produce more research, advance the discipline, advance the profession, and then you apply to the full professor position. And that's the difference between those two. So there's much more difference between assistant and associate than associate to full, from the point of view of that assistant to associate is no tenure or yes tenure. And the problem with assistant professor position is that after those 6 years, the university may say, no, sorry, not giving you tenure, and you need to leave. So it's the famous, you're up or out. So you're up for tenure, and you are in or you're out. So it becomes a little bit that stressful approach. So some people choose to go more with the adjunct position, where it's more you are involved with academia, but you're on your terms in terms of when you want to teach, and you can be doing it like Murray does, or like Elizabeth says, I'm not going to teach for a while, or I'm going to teach one semester a year, and you are invited, but you don't have a permanent contract with the university. So a new direction can come in the school, and then they decide that they don't want to hire Mary any longer. And so all of a sudden, Mary doesn't get invited to teach again. So obviously, Mary, Elizabeth are very established and very well liked and very well known for their high quality in teaching. So anyone coming will be a fool not to take advantage of adjuncts that are very good contributors to the school. So, and it's actually recommended for schools to have a very good number of adjuncts that can come and teach occasionally, may not be all the time. And then some of those adjunct positions become more permanent lecturers that are basically on more formal contracts for certain periods of time. So there are people that don't have tenure that teach regularly with other type of contracts. So it's a more complicated, but generally speaking, there is that tenure part, and then there's the other way of teaching that is more on a case-by-case basis, and you can control it, and you can ask and say, hey, I'm slow next semester, and the school, when I was an associate dean, you have a lot of requests of people that want to teach, and it's a great way for schools to invite young people that are interested in coming into academia. So anyone out there in small firms that are interested in teaching, first recommendation I would say, try to get a position where you teach one semester and see how it goes. And then people like how you're doing it, then they may invite you again. And then you start thinking about, maybe I want to apply for a tenure track position somewhere. So that's when you need to open the possibility of applying to schools all over the country, and you're ready to move to some place with that tenure track position. But the good schools take a very good advantage, and that's one of the great things about the School of Architecture in Austin, is that there's a fantastic pool of practitioners that are interested in teaching occasionally. So then, and they're young architects that are ready to start teaching. And so that's the way that they should start thinking about teaching, just by taking one semester here, and then all of a sudden you build a sense of, you want to do this more permanently, you do your own work, and then you present that when you apply for a tenure track position.
Okay, that's great information. I want to dig a little bit deeper on this, because as the architectural profession has become more fragmented in some ways, in terms of, there are a lot of people that are getting into very specific topics of research or practice or technology. And so I have looked at, potential, teaching positions, over the years, just out of interest. And they all seem to kind of lead to this idea that you should have a very specific thesis or concept that you're working on, that you then bring to the university, and that's kind of what you share and teach with the students, which seems a little bit intimidating, to people that don't necessarily have some, all-encompassing theory or facet of architecture that they are trying to explore in great detail and depth. Would applying for an adjunct position, for example, or an adjunct gig to, maybe participate in a design studio, does UT specifically kind of request that people have particular interests, or is it more broad?
So maybe Murray and Elizabeth can answer, but I can answer from the perspective of having been in the administration and having been part of this discussion. So in general, to teach studio, you need to be a good designer. That's the main thing, that, the good design schools look for good designers to teach design. So you're a good designer, you're going to have the opportunity to teach as an adjunct. It is not always the case that the advertising of the positions that are you see across the country normally are very much the way you say it, that it is, we want you to teach studio, but you need to have something else, and that something else can be the turnoff for people, that you were saying, that I don't have anything in particular. For example, the other day we had a discussion, the architecture faculty, they were saying, we need to move away from the specialization. We just need good designers, and we need to have a good designer come teach, and that should be all that we ask for. So you may find some of those. What happens that normally there are specific needs that schools have. So when you go there as when you're on tenure track, normally the school, and that's the great thing about the American system of education, is that there's enough freedom within the tenure system or tenure track for you to teach things that are required, that someone has to teach. So in a way, we all share the burden of teaching things that we have to teach, that need to be part of the accreditation process, or someone needs to teach this, or someone needs to teach that. So we need to cover that. But the university gives a lot of freedom for people to explore their own interests. So those interests is what is part of a research university. So we are a research university. So the research university means it's not enough with teaching. Basically, a tenure position is basically saying, you may be a good teacher, but that's not enough. You need to do something else. So being a good designer opens the door for you to teach as an adjunct, or it can be the leading reason why you're hired as a tenure track. But it's good for you to have something else that you are particularly good at. And it could be, you know, interested in digital design or fabrication or history or construction or something that it can be, I don't know, you think Uli is interested in timber architecture. He does a book, he works on that. So anybody can choose what they want to focus on. So schools that are good are schools that support and promote and facilitate for those faculty members to be very good at what they are bringing to the table, in addition to taking care among everybody of the actual needs of the school. So the teaching opening can come from specific things that you may have in addition to being a good designer, but schools that are design oriented, they are always looking for good designers as the that they bring to the table.
Yeah. So Murray and Elizabeth, that was kind of, would that be your experience as well? I mean, you're obviously both very talented designers, and I assume, you know, kind of you've obviously both articulated very well kind of your love of the environment and all of the great things that come with being in that environment. But did you both kind of feel comfortable moving into those positions just solely based on kind of, you know, being humble, or, you know, I'm a good designer. I know that I have things that I can share with students that will help them grow and help them understand the practice of architecture or the activity of design better without having some, you know, particular thing that you were trying to accomplish. Murray?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think back to, I mean, what I love about UT, the architecture school, it's a pretty big school. Like, I came out of a school that was tiny. There were like 25 students per year. I think in the entire 5-year undergrad program, there was like 125 students. And there were like a lot of professors, but you got 4 or 5 professors per year. So UT was like quite different. It's like it's a much bigger kind of entity. And I'd say the thing that I found kind of really interesting, because like Juan, when I started, I didn't know anything about like how the school worked. I'd been on reviews and for several years before I was asked to teach. But I remember the first time I was asked to teach with Kevin, having a conversation with Kevin Alter about it. He at the time was I think it was called director of academics, right? Juan was like chair position. And he was really like, it was like an advanced design position. So the school has like a really good, like very rigorous kind of like beginning steps for architects to kind of train them in the grad, say in the vertical, and then in undergrad. But then in the upper years, you really have this incredible range of choices, I guess. Like the way the advanced design studios work is there's a lottery, and the students get to hear the pitch for the studio from the different teachers. So someone's coming in from Chicago and they're teaching, you know, a cemetery and it's landscape based, and somebody else is doing a theater project. And so the students have at that level, at the advanced level, and actually to a certain degree in vertical works in a somewhat similar way. But really, I was quite surprised actually that I was not given no direction, but I could really teach anything I wanted to, in a sense, for the vertical studio. I mean, that being said, I kind of like discussed several ideas with Kevin, and he kind of said, well, this one may be not practical, but this sounds better. And you know, he was like very like, teach what you know. And I think that's something that's really special about the school, is that because they will, so, you know, if as an adjunct, you're given that kind of freedom, say in advanced design, to kind of shape studios the way you want, you're able to kind of interact with an instructor who is really familiar with that. So I actually worked on something that I've been kind of thinking about working on for many years. And I'm glad that when I first started teaching, I did it that way, because then I started to, before I taught, say, vertical or the undergrad design 5, that I actually learned how to teach, you know, before I got to the kind of younger brains that needed more kind of direction that way. So for me, you know, it was a kind of a perfect fit, because you're given a kind of autonomy in the studios as an adjunct. I mean, I think if you're teaching in the lower levels, and undergrad in particular, which I had never taught, where, as Elizabeth said, you're teaching the same studio and it's coordinated, they call it coordinated studio. That's a very different kind of thing. And again, it's something I love. It's something also I love about when, teaching, and I would always drop in on reviews of other practitioners. The school has this amazing invited practitioners from around the world that come and teach studios. And something I always love to do is after studio is like sneak in on like a midterm review of a professor that, Marlon Blackwell or someone who's teaching kind of C. And that's something that's kind of a wonderful aspect of the school that gives you that opportunity. I don't think, and so that was my introduction to teaching, was kind of at that level where you were able to kind of shape what you wanted to do.
Okay. Well, Elizabeth, would you like to add kind of anything about your experience as being adjunct and what you did? Was it just kind of your past experience with education, and then of course your design skills and sensibilities, and that was kind of what propelled you to sort of seek that type of position?
Yeah, I think just to keep talking about the sort of different types of studios and research in particular, the entry studios, or the first 5 classes that undergrads take, used to be coordinated. I'm not sure that's still the case, but and so everybody would be teaching the same program and usually the same site, but within that, there would be a fair amount of flexibility. And so seeing that difference was actually really interesting. And I loved some of those where, you would be teaching the same studio as like Sinclair Black. And obviously he's going to have a totally different take on everything. And you get to hear all of his experience. And in another one, you're teaching with, somebody from St. Louis that is here for a year, or anyway, you learn a lot by doing that. And it's very interesting. It's not, it's not you're choosing, but it's, you still direct the students. You still are sort of leading the studio in your own way. And then with more flexible studios, like the vertical or the advanced, you can pick your topic. And that at first is really fairly overwhelming because you can do whatever you want. So it takes some time to sort of figure out how to direct it and frame it and make it something that's achievable. And I think teaching, well, at UT in particular, the thing that is very helpful is the feedback loop too. I think getting feedback from the students, either just through talking or doing the end of semester reviews. And then also they have like course surveys. So you get very direct feedback on how you're teaching. And I think that's actually really important to learn from that and grow from that. And then in terms of, I think the question of what is research at a school like UT is actually quite confusing for architects. If you have a particular focus of research, because a lot of people will just take it like, here is my portfolio and I've been published in these 6 books of my design practice, and that's my publication. But then there is also like very specific research, like Juan was mentioning. Uli put out a book on timber structures, and for me, I was really interested in prefabrication of houses. This was back in like 2002. And so I think a donor happened to arrive at that moment in the school who was interested in the prefabrication of houses. And so they sort of matched us. And then I was able to do a conference and bring people in from all over the world and to talk about prefabrication of houses. And that was pretty amazing. That was a really cool opportunity. And then also working on the solar decathlon, that is more traditional research, when there's engineers involved, everyone's suddenly very comfortable that, oh, okay, now we're doing research because these guys, but that was a huge learning experience. And I definitely got exposed to all kinds of new ideas and research, and being able to, that project, I don't know if the school is still doing it, but I'll definitely put in a big plug for Solar Decathlon. That is an interdisciplinary project working with the School of Mechanical Engineering and electrical engineering, I believe. And anyway, that was great and a great experience for the students. It was also completely exhausting. And I would actually really caution people that are trying to balance office and teaching and being in an adjunct, like that like research, writing a book, it takes a long time. It's a full-time job. I mean, which is one thing to be very clear. The tenure track position that Juan is talking about is a full-time job, and the application process is much lengthier and more involved than working as a lecturer, which is something that you can, basically, a couple of months ahead of time, you can inquire and potentially be hired, in a fairly brief process. Whereas a tenure track position, again, is a much more sort of time-consuming and elaborate process. So
okay. So potentially, if you are a practitioner now and you are interested in teaching, the way to do it is to go adjunct, kind of get your feet wet, and then I assume for some people probably they think, well, this is where I should be. And then they decide to just kind of, okay, I'm gonna go the path of getting tenure, and I realize it's gonna be a full-time job, and maybe that means I have to take a lesser role in my firm and let somebody else kind of take that over if I want to keep it going. Or I just
partner, I think, is one of the keys. Have a great partner.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Juan, it's so rare to be a tenured professor as active as Juan is and have like an office with, I mean, this is like, there's like literally a handful of people that kind of pull that off.
Well, that's becoming more and more clear with this conversation.
Yeah. For sure. Also, what happened is, like, for example, in my case, when I applied for that position and they explained to me what tenure was, because I really didn't know very well. And so I remember that people will ask me, what are the places have you applied? And in my mind, I was staying in Austin, so I'm teaching here, but I was not applying anywhere else, so I always say that I teach because I can keep practice. When you apply for a tenure track, you need to be ready to think about that as your main life goal. So you become like, this is a full-time, and practice could be more like a thing that is there than see how it happens. So in a way, the other way around is a little harder to do it when you're doing it as a tenure track, because it's a full-time job. So you need to devote a lot of time to two things. So it means a lot of good partners, like Elizabeth said, partners in life and in work. You cannot do this. I couldn't have done this if I hadn't had these partnerships, fantastic at home and in the office, with Rosa and Miguel. And it's the only way that you can switch back and forth, because it's really like having two full-time jobs. So it is that kind of thing. So when you apply for that tenure, you need to be very aware of what you're getting into, in the sense that it's not the same application process, like Elizabeth said, but also the expectations are different. But it is a big question in architecture schools all over the world, not only in the US, in terms of like, what's the role of practitioners in architecture? Like Elizabeth said, what does research mean in the architectural world? Other parts of the university see architecture a little bit like as a strange. We're closer to fine arts in terms of like producing things is considered part of the research output. In other places is more based on papers and and grant money, and so we're a little bit of an odd animal in the kind of in the ecosystem of the university higher education. And so we always say that the dean, one of the jobs of the dean is to explain the president and the provost what architecture is about and what do we do and why are we different than the, people in physics or in chemistry. And so it is a debate that's going to keep going on for a long time, but basically there's an emphasis. Some people put more emphasis that we should be like all the disciplines. We should have more PhDs. We should do this more academic. And other people that, and I'm on that camp, that feel like it's very important to maintain that sense of connection with the practice, not only from the point of view of, and this is the theory, a lot of people say, oh, you want practitioners, you can have them as lecturers. And I say, well, I think it's important to have them also in the inner workings of the school from the point of view of the administration and the management and the idea about what the school wants to be. So I don't know, it is going to still be going on when we are all gone. It's probably still they will have those same discussions in many, but it's going on in many places, not only in the US.
Okay. So logistically speaking, if someone, that's listening today wanted to pursue, the idea of an adjunct position at UT, Elizabeth, earlier you mentioned Uli, Juan, you mentioned Cisco, which they sound like they're two very integral people at the UT School of Architecture. But are they kind of the liaisons for?
Yeah, no, I would say Uli. Go Uli first.
Okay.
Uli, so go Uli and tell. I mean, Uli would love to have. He's very responsive. Would like to have, and he needs to have people because there are cancellations at the last minute. So people. I mean, probably Elizabeth Murray. Sometimes you have had that calls like last minute. We need someone.
Yeah.
So it happens that sometimes someone has an emergency, an accident, a family, and then you need to have someone. So that's a great thing to be in that position and say, hey, Uli, I'm ready. You have something that comes up and I can do it. But so you have something more or less in mind, have something in mind that you would like to do is great because it can be a very good thing to be able to jump right away. So
I would say reviews too. Like for me, It was great to have been for a few years on reviews and would start with like mid reviews because they're a little less formal. So they'd be like midterm reviews to become familiar with the faculty and the work. And then, and then you'd be invited maybe to final reviews, which are a little bit more formal. But that for me, that was really helpful because I kind of knew, I got a feeling for the students and that sort of thing through the school. And there's, you're always in need of reviewers, even more so than instructors, right?
Sure.
It's good to have fresh voices too. Like Sean, I've had you to several reviews and,
No, but
Juan, would Uli be excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. Would Uli be the person to contact to say, I would be interested just in participating in reviews as well? Or would that be a different liaison?
Two things that I think people could do. I would say, yes, make yourself available for reviews. I think what Murray is saying is very true. Very unlikely that someone is going to be invited to teach without having been in any review or anything. So what Murray said is a very good way for the person to familiarize himself or herself with the school, but also for the school to, oh yeah, he or she came to this review, he or she was great. And so there's a sense that something good chemistry can be built out of those reviews. So I would say, yes, tell Uli to say, you can tell him you're available, invite me. But then if you have any personal contact with people that are teaching, like Morris said, you can be invited to interim reviews for a particular studio. And those are very good because you can be a little, it's a little more informal, like Morris said, and it's a great way to build something that can be a good advocate for you. I mean, that faculty member say, oh yeah, Sean has been coming. So if Uli is saying, you say, hey Uli, if you want to, you can put Murray as a reference, and Uli calls Murray, hey, what do you think about Sean? I'm thinking about him teaching this, and Murray will say, oh yeah, he was great. He came to my reviews. So that's the way things work. So you need to let the world that you're available, that you're interested, that you have a natural, ability to do it, and then people will sometimes connect because the need is there, and you are there ready to cover that need.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about UT. We've all been lucky to teach at UT, but there are other places to teach, and I think it's really important to consider that. St. Edward's, ACC, and if we as a profession are trying to increase diversity, I think it's really important, or one of my pet peeves is that AISD teaches such little design and architecture. And I think to increase diversity, teaching in the public schools, teaching architecture in the public schools, more of it. I think there's 1 or 2 classes, but I think, I mean, this is obviously a bigger issue, maybe that, you know, I would hope the AIA would eventually advocate for, but looking for other places to teach and other groups of students besides just UT students. Like I know some people in Austin drive to A&M, drive to College Station. So there are, look for other teaching opportunities outside of UT as well.
Great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
San Antonio, yeah. Yep.
All right, it's 1:02. Do you guys have one more question in you, or do we need to kind of have a hard stop?
Do we have any questions from the audience?
We actually don't. So my Q&A at the end didn't go as planned, but that's okay. This has been an incredible conversation, and I personally have learned an immense amount of information and feel like I have a really tangible picture of, you know, what it would be to kind of go through the channels and understand what it would be like to pursue, you know, not necessarily a teaching position, but kind of get into the reviews, you know, look then to the future of potential adjunct relationships with the university. So I think that's all been wonderful to learn about. So I guess I would have, you know, maybe had one last question, sort of overarching question for all of you. Are you up for it? Does everybody got another 10, 15, or
yeah, sure.
You need to go? Okay. All right. So I guess just in general, and Juan, I'll start with you. Is there something you have learned from teaching, or an unexpected discovery, outcome that, you know, has affected the way you think about your own practice, be it in the design process, the trajectory of architecture in general, as you help a new generation venture into the profession?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, in a way that I see my academic and professional career happening parallel, because basically I've been doing it both the whole time. So I don't see an easy, I mean, I don't have an easy way to disconnect them. But going back to what I said before, and Elizabeth articulated very well, being self-reflective about your work, that's one of the things that I think the academic environment allows you to. So for example, this monograph, the book that we are publishing, is also coming with the mindset of someone that is thinking about teaching. So and I'm not thinking about the book as just like, let's just put the professional work. It's presented, is articulated, is meant to be a teaching tool also, and is the result of a lot of years thinking and studios. Like Murray said, the advanced studios are great because you can explore things that you're particularly interested in with a lot of freedom. The other studio that I teach are very more fundamentals, and you need to cover certain things. So it's a different way of teaching. So it's not the same to teach a second-year undergrad than an advanced studio. So the advanced studios have been great. For example, a lot of one of the things they cover in the book is the notion of the landscape city, urban design ideas, taking students to travel, going to Mexico, doing a lot of the work and the thinking that I have been doing in my own research. I also like to write. I don't have as much time, but I'm discovering writing more and more is something that I like to do, from op-ed pieces and opinion pieces to more academic articles, are all related to that self-reflection and how you are more aware of the things that you're doing and the things that you see that is not maybe so easy to see for other people. And then you just present them in ways that is easier for other people to see what you may have seen after reflecting it for many, many years. So there is definitely a benefit from the maturation, that you mature as a designer, as a thinker, and the work is in a way going hand in hand. That's a good school. I mean, it's a school that stops bringing anything positive to the person teaching is not functioning well. You know, the teacher needs to have that sense that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but you teach to keep learning. So the idea that you're learning is a little like what Murray was saying about Peter Eisman. Peter Eisman is there because he's learning. He's excited about the new idea. He's excited to work with this. It's the priceless moments for architects. I mean, you remember those commercials about priceless, you know, the MasterCard, whatever credit card that they had the priceless moment. I always said for us as students, I mean, for us as professors, when the students grow, like Elizabeth was saying, the students grow, they become successful at what they do, and you start hearing from them, you know, over the years, and you keep hearing from them. So I received an email this morning from a student that was my student twice in the school. In my Mexican architecture class, she also had an advanced studio. We went to the Yucatan. We traveled the Maya region. She worked on my office too. And then she went on to work with Renzo Piano for 4 years. So she just finished working at Renzo Piano. She wrote me an email this morning telling me, she was congratulating me about the book and the grades. She's seen the advanced everything. And so she's telling me about the fact that she's starting a PhD in Oslo after 4 years working with Renzo Piano, having worked. And she's telling me all the things that had influenced her trajectory from the practice, going to piano, to being in connection with academia, the exchanges that we have had over the years. We even started working on a paper about Maya settlement patterns. So there's something fantastic to see all the time, that sense of, oh, wow, we all want to have a positive impact in the world. And when you feel like this happened with your children, with the people, with your friends, when you feel like you have done something that has some beneficial consequences, it's very fulfilling. So when you hear those students being in a way reflecting themselves on the things that they have learned from you, it just doesn't get any better than that. You know, is the one of the priceless moments about teaching, when you have that sense of reward from hearing, and especially when it's not like a week after finishing. It's more, hey, tell me what you think after a year, after 5 years, after 10 years, after 20 years. And then it's fantastic, because, you know, you're a colleague at that point, but you're having still that conversation. So
sure. That's fantastic. Elizabeth, what's something you have learned, or an unexpected discovery in your own right?
I think, I'm sorry, the cat's attacking me again. It's always, when you're teaching, it's always sort of changing what that is. Things that seem very simple, you realize are actually quite profound. Things that you thought were really complicated proved to be not so interesting, or things that you thought were very interesting become sort of redundant, or and I think that's a very valuable process to put yourself through. And I also think that it's really good just to have to stand up in front of people and talk. That's good.
Sure.
I think particularly now, and for small offices or sole practitioners, it tends to be slightly siloed. You know, it's easy to just be in your office working away all the time. And I mean, you're definitely talking to other people, but it's not talking to other architects. So I think one of the real values is the community of architects that you are put in touch with and talk with on reviews, or the opportunity to go to lectures often, to really sort of, you know, have a constant influx of new ideas, I think is really beneficial. And, you know, it's a nice way to make friends and to, you know, find people with shared experience. So.
Great. Murray, what are your thoughts?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I'm kind of on that, like similar to Juan, it's kind of hard to separate out. To me, it's like one kind of like larger kind of organic practice, you know, teaching And it's particularly since, like currently, like Lincoln and Travis who work in the office I got to know them at school. So now they're working here and they're influencing the work too. So I don't know if I can cite like a specific thing. I mean, the one thing I'll say, I guess, just as a general sort of trend that I've observed over the years, I guess, probably the first studios I taught were probably really terrible. Like I definitely had there are different approaches to teaching. I probably started with a very kind of prescriptive, this is, that everything was kind of mapped out. They had to draw a certain way and had to look a certain way. And it was like all very heavy-handed, I'd say, studio. And I guess just over the years, I think I've gotten better at it and realized that, I probably don't know as much as I thought I did. I mean, I guess that's the thing to me is like over the years I've found that it's actually like the sense of kind of openness and kind of sense of wonder of architecture and the broadness of it. I think what Elizabeth said about that, the simple things actually are quite complex. So that I think is maybe one discovery that first it was much harder than I thought it was going to be teaching. Like somehow I thought I had experience as a student and that was enough. It's like if it's not enough to live in a house to be able to design it. So that's one thing, and learning how to be a little lighter touch, a little like it's a tricky, it's like not like running an office. I guess that was the other thing too. When I first started teaching as a practitioner, it kind of felt like I was running 15 projects in the office, which is like a terrible way to teach. Rather than like being able to approach each student on their own terms and really try to help bring out that individual voice. And the other thing I'll say too is just like I think the most fundamental thing probably, looking back, I mean, there are brilliant architects that make terrible teachers and architects that are actually terrible designers that make kind of brilliant teachers. That's the other thing I find quite kind of interesting. But I think the main thing is really there's a lot of reasons not to be an architect, especially if you practice. Like we could list a long list of reasons why, but I think one thing is, the school can do is like kind of reinforce and build on the reasons why you should be an architect, right? The kind of like why, like you can learn to love something, and you can learn that. You can learn the love of architecture. We started by talking about Eisenman. I think that was, as an instructor, I mean, I didn't understand most of what he was saying, but the one thing I did understand was he loved architecture and he had a really strong, passionate connection to it. That conveyed. I remember that feeling, and above and beyond like Deleuze and deconstructivism, I was totally over my head, but he conveyed the love of architecture. And that's the thing for me, I think, that I've learned is, probably a more important component than your ability to kind of like explain kind of a technical solution or how brilliant you are as a designer. And to me, that's the important thing. The school actually is a kind of like protector of that kind of like importance of architecture, because in the profession, there are many, many challenges that we face more and more as we go on. A lot of reasons why one should not be I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to be an architect, but the school is one place I find kind of as the years go on, that becomes more. The other thing last thing I wanted to say that I think about too, is that really some of the most remarkable people that I know ever teach at the school, like really remarkable people. And that's something very special too. Like this is not like just the architects walking the hallways that I interact with over the last 20 years. I mean, they're remarkable people and thinkers. And it's an incredible privilege to be able to kind of like just brush shoulders or be in the same conversation with this group of people. Too. That's something that I've learned. I wasn't really quite aware of that before. I guess coming from a school surrounded by famous architects, I wasn't kind of aware of that. I also had that feeling too when I went to school as an undergrad. I didn't even know who Peter Eisenman was. When I had him as a teacher, And there's a certain naivete there, which is fine. But I recognize now, being older, how rare it is to be around those kind of thinkers, right? And the architecture school is full of like really, like Juan. I mean, Juan's a remarkable teacher, a remarkable architect, and just to have the opportunity to have conversation, to be on reviews. And Elizabeth too, I'll say, I mean, Elizabeth's practice is one that I've always admired. I look to their work constantly. I have memories of being on reviews of your studio, like the Seed Bank studio and some of your other studios. And that's something very special. I mean, I value that, I think, in a way, those kind of ephemeral moments, and having connections with people like that is really special. So,
Very good point.
Well put. Well put. Well, I've kept you all a little bit longer. I will open up the floor to any of you who would like to, say one final thing, or maybe something that you wanted to articulate that we didn't necessarily get to. No pressure if we should just end this, because it's been quite an amazing discussion. And on behalf of the AIA Austin and specifically the Small Firms Roundtable, I really want to thank you very deeply, all three of you, for taking the time to share your experiences and your outlooks. It's been quite enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
thanks, Sean.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Follow-up questions, just, we're here, so let us know.
Yes, I'm glad that you said that, because if there is anyone that has a question that we did not get to, I can make my email address available, so you're welcome to kind of email those to me, or email them directly to you guys, if that's okay. I don't want to burden you necessarily, but in some form or fashion, if you have a question that you didn't get answered, please let one of us know, and we'll make sure you get the answer you were seeking.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sean.
Good night. Great to see you.
Bye.
Just now.
Bye.
Yeah.